Good morning, everyone. I just rolled out of bed, sitting by the window, my regular routine. Wanted to finish the story of Hal. I posted Hal chapter 4 last night, and I don't think it'd be right if I just left the story at that, so there's not much more to say. Hal told me when he was in the hospital the reason he had hit rock bottom was that he could not believe that he lived in a country where children were permanently and completely taken away from parents who haven't even broken any laws. He couldn't believe that he lived in a world where mild depression was a reason to take your children away from you and never even allow you to see them on a supervised basis. He couldn't believe in a world where that was supposed to be the way to help somebody, perk them up. Hal realized that even if he hadn't suffered from depression, being denied the right to ever even see his children when he hadn't even broken a law or hurt them or threatened anybody or done anything wrong, that any parent, that would be enough to plummet any parent into the depths of despair, even if they didn't have mild depression to begin with. Hal's ex-wife's lawyer kept saying to Hal that, and to the court, that this was for the children's best interest. And Hal wonders how, if he had shot himself in the head, as he came so close to doing, how that would have affected his children. And whether it was in his children's best interest not to have their father ever again in their lives. When I told Hal's story to other people, they've often thought, well, maybe there must be something more. There must be something that you're forgetting to tell me, because this couldn't happen to a parent in the United States. Well, that's what Hal used to think too. Those long days after coming back from work, sitting out on his balcony, couldn't read his daughter a bedtime story, couldn't make the kids dinner, couldn't help with homework. It was just him all by himself, wondering what the hell he did, how this could happen to him. Well, there was an unseen crux behind everything that happened to Hal. Yeah, sure, his depression was mild, and even if you believe that maybe his children should have been taken temporarily until he got back on medicine, even if you took that stance, what justified never allowing Hal to even see his children? What justified his ex-wife to petition the court that he never be allowed to even have access or communication with his children until they're at least 18? I think that would be enough to cause any loving father to plummet into the depths of despair. There was an unseen crux. There was an unseen crux behind everything. Hal had told his children that he was gay. His ex-wife and her family didn't like that. Didn't want a gay man raising their grandchildren. And they did everything in their power to throw as much crap at Hal, as much crap at the fan until some of it would stick. And the ironic part is, the court allowed them to do that. Hal blames himself. He blames himself for telling the world that he was gay. Hal believes that if he hadn't have done that, then the motivating force behind this whole entire thing would have never existed. And none of this would have ever happened. Well, up until the time when Hal had held the gun to his head and sat up all night, tugging at the trigger, up until that night, he missed his children terribly. But even though he didn't shoot himself in the head, something did die that night. He felt it when he was in the hospital. Something was gone. What was left of Hal stopped missing his children. Hal stopped missing his children. And he couldn't understand why, and then he realized it's because the part of him that was the father, the part of him that wanted those children back so badly, that part of him did die. That was the part of Hal that shot itself that night. And the only part that remained living was the part that Hal is today. Well, they wouldn't release Hal from the hospital unless he was released to a family member. They didn't want to send Hal back to his apartment because they knew that being back there all by himself again, in a matter of weeks, he'd probably plummet back to the same place he was at. So, Hal quit his job as a teacher in the middle of the school year and moved up to Maine where his family lived. Hal's life is completely different now. He spends a lot of time in nature. He spends a lot of time thinking about what happened, and also a lot of time trying not to think about it at all. He doesn't want to go back to teaching ever again. I talked to him several times on the phone, and he was very angry at God for the longest time. Most people wouldn't be angry at God, but he was, because in Hal's mind, everything is a part of God. And those parts of God that maliciously took away his children, he saw in his mind as parts of God that had betrayed him. But whenever he expressed that thought to me, I told Hal that I loved him and that I'm also a part of God. But I'm a part of God that loves him, and that he needs to love himself too. During the year and a half after this has happened, Hal has begun to realize that this was not his fault. That this was the fault of people who are prejudiced, people who are filled with hatred and anger towards others, and a court system that allows them to express it in unjust ways. And Hal does not believe that this would have turned out the same way had he not been gay. Well, it's been 2 years now since Hal's children were taken away from him, and he hasn't been allowed to see them since. He does call them on the phone at least twice a week. But in spite of all that Hal's been through, he's gonna be fine. He wakes up in the morning, sits by the window, and he drinks his coffee. He breathes the air. He hears the birds singing in the trees outside. And in spite of everything, Hal's still grateful to be alive.